All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. Feel very privileged to have Eric Downing from Hawker Title on here with me today. So, Eric, how's it going, man?
It's great. It's going great. How about you?
Oh, it's we were just talking before that. It's just been a busy, crazy January a little bit, but that's all right. It's a good thing. So it's better to be busy than not busy, I think, in this
It
industry. So
is. You're right. Well, it's the time of year we all take care of the things we can't take care of the rest of the year. So,
yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do on this episode, Eric and I have kind of emailing back and forth, and we kind of compiled a list of kind of maybe the top, really just questions that a real estate investor should be asking a title company before they start working with them, or maybe if you're a new real estate investor, kind of those questions that you need to be asking your title companies once you start going and things like that. We'll get into that here in a second. Before we do that, Eric, I'd love to just you to share everybody just a little bit of your background, kind of what you were doing before you started working with Hawker and title companies, and just before you started get really to working with real estate investors, man.
yeah. So, thank you again for having me. And my background is in small business, and I have been everything from the dish boy at a local restaurant all the way up through management in restaurants. I've worked for several different industries over the years. I've owned my own small construction company. I've invested, I've bought and sold real estate. Prior to coming into the title world, which I mean, I'll admit I was never growing up thinking I'm going to grow up and work for the title industry. But when I was actually traveling as a business consultant, and I worked with small businesses all over North America. It was not industry specific. I might be at a winery one week and a asphalt company in nowhere, Missouri the next week. So it was change management. So most of you business owners out there, you might be good at selling your widgets or doing certain things, but we were coming in as support to help people with everything from sales, just accounting, taxes, working through HR matters, everything like that. So I really honed a skill for working with small business owners. And so when I met Janet Hawker, the owner of our company, she was looking for someone to bring some of that talent and some of that experience into the Hawker title world. And that's my favorite thing to do is to work with the small business owners, such as the real estate investors and realtors. And we bring a different, kind of look, if you will, than maybe your normal title company. We really enjoy getting to know and work one-on-one with our clients and grow their business at the same time that we're trying to grow ours. So I'm always geared at trying to help a small business owner make improvements to their business, even if they don't think that there are improvements to be made. Typically there's some underlying things that can be worked on and honed on, and that's really what my passion is
Yeah.
doing that.
No, and I can attest to that. I remember when a couple of years ago when I took over as the operations person for the Simple team, you and I got together, you were doing the operations and stuff. And there were just a lot of questions you even just kind of brought up of like, hey, did you consider this? Or are you thinking about this? I'm like, we've never done that before. We were a growing business at the time. So Eric can definitely help you with some title stuff. He can also help you with some of that, just kind of the small business stuff and things like that. So, man, really appreciate your heart to help people with that, and then also just your experience behind that as well. So great stuff here. So let's go ahead and get into this kind of list that we kind of formulated here on really just what are some questions if you are a real estate investor, whether you're in state, out of state, whatever it is, and you are looking to work with a title company or two or three, and you're building your team, you're building those resources. What are some questions that you should be asking that title company to, really kind of know what they do, if they're, how qualified they are, those types of things to be able to work with what you want to do. So
Yeah.
everybody's different. There's so many different niches within real estate. So does your title company know assignments, double closings? Do they know how to work with notes? Do they know how to do all just everything, whatever you're doing, can they help you with it? So we're just kind of go through some of those questions and things. And Eric, that first question that we just decided was that best question for it is like asking that title company is like, do you work with real estate investors? So we all know, have we been through that where we get a title sent, or we send the title, over to a title company and it's just like, oh, wait, what is this? What is this, an assignment? Is this an investment property? How do you work with it? So really the best question is like, do you work with other real estate investors? I think that should be the first question. And really along with that lines is like, what makes you qualified to work with real estate investors and me with what I want to do? So Eric, just on that note, like how behind that, why is that question? Why is that important for investors to be asking that?
Absolutely. And I think that, it's funny because I don't get that question often enough. What I usually get is the opening of, "Hey, what are your fees? Hey, do you do this type of investing?" And so I guess in a roundabout way, they're asking me like, "Are you familiar with investing?" But on a weekly basis, I take calls and emails from new investors and even seasoned investors that are just maybe wanting to test the water somewhere else. But what's important about it is, and I'm sure the seasoned investors out there listening right now, you've sent title work to somewhere like you alluded to, Brian, and they've come back with, "Wait a minute, I don't know how you've structured this, but it certainly isn't legal and I can't do it."
Yeah.
And so oftentimes I'll come on the heels of that. Somebody got a response like that and they'll reach out to me by way of, maybe a referral somewhere. And absolutely, you've got to know that what you're out there trying to make a business doing is something that your title company is familiar with transacting. So oftentimes the ones that really kind of throw title companies for a loop is subject to. I'll constantly get, into conversations with investors, and they're like, "Well, I was told that this isn't even legal, and I shouldn't be doing this." And it's really not about legal. We're certainly not going to do anything illegal, and we're not going to, be a contributor to that. But it's just a matter of, do they understand the process and the different steps that go along with it? And we do, and that's really part of what makes us a little bit different, is just ensuring that we've got an attorney that helps us get everything processed, and we have the experience and the know-how to get those things done. But in general, you just want to make sure that, and a lot of investors don't even understand it themselves. Like, they they came across this deal, they found out some things that might make it a little bit more difficult to do a regular transaction. So they've heard about, or they've seen or read about these different maneuvers that they can make. And it's just trying to find some place that understands the concepts that you're talking about and can help you better understand how to go about transacting in that way. So whether it be assignments, double closes, subject to, seller financing, whatever it is, you want a title company that understands those concepts.
Yeah, exactly. I know the question you always see like around Facebook and the different groups and stuff is like, "Hey, what's an investor friendly title company in Indianapolis?" And you see the list of, your typical, there's 5 to 8 that everybody recommends, that we all know about, that we all work with, and they're all great and stuff. But it's like, when they're reaching out to them, like, is that what people are asking? Like, "Hey, how many real estate investors are you working with right now, and what's going on?" And just because their aunt closed a retail transaction with this title company doesn't necessarily mean you should use them to do a subject to wrap or something like that next week. So,
Right.
yeah, that's all very important and stuff that you should be asking. So,
Well, and that's why I said, it doesn't, the question doesn't get posed enough. I will answer that question, although it doesn't get asked. I will let them know, like, here's our credentials,
yeah,
here's what we can do. But it certainly is a very important question. Before you worry about how much it's going to cost, when can we close? That's always like the number one question. All right, can you get this closed in 48 hours? Well, maybe. I know nothing about it yet. Why don't we start here and, and go down the proper road? But it really is about making sure that you don't get a week or 2 or 3 weeks into this transaction just to find out they don't really know how to transact that, and that happens quite a bit. I mean, I've got a deal right now that's exactly what's happened. It's been at another title company and it's gotten to a point where they can't handle it. Now, fortunately, we don't have to start from ground zero, but we do have to start and work our way up to that point of being ready to close. And it's going to take another couple of weeks to get there. So
yeah.
the more you can, get aligned with your title company early on, the better.
Yeah, definitely. So, and then one of those other questions we kind of came up with is like, what are the requirements for a purchase agreement? So I know it's one of my favorite things to talk to some title company owners about and stuff. Is like, what's your craziest like purchase agreement story? Like, how's it come? I've heard about, coming over on napkins or paper bags or paper plates or all that stuff. But like, that's one of the things that like people I think need to know. And a lot of people are doing it, where they have the regular Indiana state, the purchase agreement, or maybe they've got their, contracts through someone like Hawker or another title company or something like that. But that's something that they should be asking, because every state is different too. And there's some investors that are investing from out of state, or even maybe a wholesaler's out of state that they're getting the deal from or anything like that. Is they should be asking, if I'm working with a title company, I need to know what needs to be on that purchase agreement. What do they need? Purchase agreement or assignment contract, assignment addendum. I need to know what's on that. And those are the things that that really, this is a question that you need to be asking, because you don't want that holding up that closing for you stuff. So when that, with that question of just like the requirements and find that out, like is that really just as simple as like, hey, here's our list, here's what we need, and is there anything more than that they need to really consider with it?
Yeah, there actually is. I mean, in reality, there's a lot in that purchase agreement that you're basically saying, like, here, I'm willing to do this, and but not everyone pays attention to the small print, right? And so, in the state of Indiana, a true purchase agreement is really just validated by something in writing. We will get those people that say, well, I was going to buy this from my cousin. Well, where's your purchase agreement? Well, we just shook hands. Well, okay, but you actually need to write it down. And we've certainly received purchase agreements on napkins and post-it notes, and theoretically those work. Again, if it's in writing and it's signed by the parties that are involved in the transaction, assuming that our title work comes back to validate that the seller is the true vested owner of the property. But there's just so much that has to be considered. And I would say that no matter what purchase agreement you're using, find a title company that's willing to look at that purchase agreement before you get it executed and make sure that they can advise you on, is it laid out correctly? Does it hit the hot points? Does it hit the things that should be important to you as an investor? That's one thing that we do regularly here, is we run it through our contracts team, and we make sure that it's hitting all the areas that it needs to hit. And we'll make recommendations of areas that should be added or adjusted. And certainly we sell document packages too, but I know a lot of newer investors, like, your capital's very low, if there's any there hardly at all, and so you're trying to get off the ground. And so we want to work with you, and that's what you want, is a title company that'll do that. What's important? Purchase price, property address, naming who the seller and the buyer are, and then some of the things that make it more specific to the closing. So when does the contract expire? That's important. What are your options as a buyer to get out of that contract should there be anything that come up that you may say, I don't want this anymore? What's your out? Is it simply just the review of, doing an inspection? Is it, anything to do with the title work? It's really important. If you look at the really long legal attorney written purchase agreements, they give multiple outs because there's multiple ways that you may find yourself in a tough spot. And so you want to make sure you're talking about, when is it going to close? What are the conditions of buying? Is it cash? Is it, lender? What are you being given as a buyer as far as opportunities to purchase it? How are the fees going to be split? Who's going to pay for the closing cost? Who's going to pay for the title insurance? Who's going to pay for the prorated taxes? Is that something that the seller is going to have to pay for? I mean, that's typical, but not always with investor deals.
Right.
And so you just want to make sure that you kind of have a spotlight on the important. Obviously, again, purchase price, property address, who the parties are. Those are the really only required things that we need in order to get started. But you want to make sure it's in writing between you and the other party. Who's paying for this? How is this getting settled? HOA, taxes, all of those things.
Yeah. And I think it's really important too, of just not kind of understanding like, hey, do I have all this stuff in there, but understanding what is in there and that you can explain it to whoever. So I know there's a whole conversation. You and I have done episodes on this before, of just like in general with wholesaling stuff, but even past the wholesaler, for those flippers that are out there that like all of a sudden, oh, I have like a little bit more of my inventory right now, I'm going to go ahead and just wholesale one of these instead of flipping it because my crew's busy or whatever it is. Or, they kind of just start wholesaling one, or no matter, you're just doing another strategy. I'm going to sell this on owner financing stuff. Whatever contracts you're using, that you understand what's in there as well, and that you can explain it to the other party, and it just makes things go a lot smoother.
Well, and to that point, Brian, it's important that that the seasoned investors out there, or the listeners the seasoned investors out there have different contracts for different types of investing, and that's really the way it should be. I mean, there really is a universal purchase agreement that can be used in any way, and it just has a whole bunch of blank lines in it called other conditions.
Yeah.
If you are experienced enough to fill in those other conditions with the specifics of what kind of transaction you want to do, go for it. But that's why it's important. And we have several investor customers that have purchased our subject to package, our wholesale package, our seller financing package, because they have very specific conditions and terms written for each type of investing. So it is important that, I got a contract, I bought it off so-and-so, well, let's look at it. Let's make sure it covers the points that are going to best protect you. And obviously we're a third party, so we need to make sure it's going to protect everyone. We're not going to just go through a contract just for what's best for you, but that is kind of the approach we take when we're working with the investors.
Yeah, I've definitely been in that scenario where, somebody sent me a contract and like, this is definitely like a subject to contract that we're just like, it's just, they're trying to pass off just a regular, purchase agreement, stuff like that. It can be done, but let's move this around. Let's change this and stuff like that. So, now one of the things you brought up within that contract is taxes. So it's always, and we, like I said, we can kind of get past kind of the wholesaler side of this, because that's always the thing. Like, just wholesalers, just make sure you indicate somewhere who's paying taxes on there, if it's prorated or not. But let's talk a little bit about that, of just like how taxes are paid here in Indiana. Some get tripped up on that. Every state is different with kind of how they do it. Indiana is a little funky, but this is one of the things, especially as an out-of-state investor, and even just a new investor here in Indiana. That's one of those questions that you should be asking your title company, going through with them, is how are taxes paid in this? And then knowing kind of the difference on that contract of how it could be worded, how it could be laid out, and the different options that you could actually take when you're receiving a contract or writing a contract for somebody else.
Yeah, and honestly, if you're listening to this and you have any questions around taxes, star this part of it right here, because it is the number one thing that throws a roadblock into the physical closing that occurs. So we've been in this for, let's say you sent me a purchase agreement 10 days ago. We got through everything. We processed the settlement statement exactly according to the purchase agreement that you submitted. We get to closing, and there is such a high probability that somebody is going to be surprised, and it's almost always the seller. Investors, you're not working with people that sell and buy real estate often. You're usually working with folks that have a reason for needing to get off out from underneath the burden of the property, and so they have no idea. They'll say that, hey, I'm current with taxes, I made the November installment, assuming we're going to close, let's say, in January of this year. But that's not true. In Indiana, we pay 1 year in arrears. And before I go there, I think it's important to note Indiana really isn't that complicated compared to a lot of other states that I've seen. There are some states that just would make your head explode with how they actually, assess taxes and accrue taxes. But Indiana's not that complicated. The one thing that people have to remember is we pay 1 year in arrears. So that statement balance that we just paid for the November 10th due date in 2020 was actually collected for and paid for the second half of the year prior in 2019. So when you go to close in January of 2021, yeah, you made the last installment, but there are still taxes that accrued for the entire year of 2020 that have not been paid. And let's say we closed on, January 25th, there's 25 days of this year in 2021 that need to be paid. So it's more than a year that seller's still on the hook for. And if they're set up as prorated. So that's the two different ways. You can either prorate taxes in the purchase agreement, which means the seller is going to pay for the taxes up through the closing date, or they can just be assumed by the buyer, which means the buyer is going to pay for taxes on that property during a period of time they didn't own the property. And that's why it's such a hurdle with folks, is because they get to the closing table and the seller says, well, I don't have any taxes due. I paid all my taxes. I'm current. I understand you're not behind. You're not delinquent, which there are a lot of those too, but you're not delinquent. But because they're not due until the year after they actually accrue, you haven't paid them through the time that you own the property. And I've seen this take a huge chunk out of investors, margin that they're trying to, account for when they're buying a property. Let's say they've got an assignment contract for $7,000. They feel like they're going to walk away with $7,000, and then they get to the closing table, and the seller's got $2,500 worth of unpaid taxes, not delinquent, just not due and payable yet. So the seller says, I'm not doing that. Then somebody's got to make a decision to come up to the table and either split the difference or figure out a way to make that seller happy. So it's crucial that conversation be had between an investor and the other party at the contract stage. And the more you understand it, you're in that home, you're talking with somebody, you're getting them to sign the contract, and there's the prorated tax section. It's up to you if you're going to prorate it, if you're going to assume it as the investor, it's really up to you. But if you're going to prorate it, you need to make sure you're explaining to the seller that doesn't mean that they won't have to pay taxes. They probably almost always will have to pay taxes at the closing table.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. There's great tips right there, Eric. And I think it's just something too to consider of when you've already, hopefully through all this stuff, you're working on that relationship with the title company and everything like that. So then when you do, it's 2 or 3 days away from the closing of the closing of that property, and they're starting to work on your closing statement and the settlement statement, everything like that, you're checking in and saying, hey, how much are due in taxes? And you're looking at that and you understand that. So you can have that conversation before you actually go to that closing table to sign the documents. Be like, hey, like, Mr. Seller, do you realize that, like, here's what this means. Do you understand this? That basically you're not going to get that $7,000, really $7,000 minus the 2,500 or
Yeah.
whatever. So just having that conversation is really crucial. Let's kind of move on to
And
this.
just
Go
so
ahead.
we know, like that is one area that I spend a lot of time on. I've created a couple handouts to help people. Even then, I mean, I was here for probably 2 years and I didn't understand it completely. I mean, it really takes like drawing it out on a piece of paper for it to make sense. But if people can just remember that we pay 1 year in arrears, meaning that what has accrued has not been paid, regardless of whether they're current with their payments, they're not current with what's going to be coming due. And so typically we apply that as a credit in a non-pay period. So like January through April, we don't pay taxes. May, we pay taxes. So when May comes, it comes out of the seller's proceeds and goes to the county. But from January to April, it comes out of the seller proceeds and goes into it basically takes away what the buyer needs. It goes as a credit to the buyer. So it's just important that they understand, that's another concept is people think that we withheld it on the settlement statement, so we must have paid the county. No,
Right.
if it's actually a pay period of May or November, we just apply it as a credit to the buyer. The buyer's still going to have to pay the taxes, but hey, they got the credit at closing.
Yeah, that's really good. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I have had that conversation before of like, oh, I thought we got the taxes prorated. Weren't they paid? No, you got the credit. You have to pay them, in that May or November and stuff. So yeah,
Yep.
good point there. So kind of that next thing is I think a really good question that, an investor should be asking that title company is, what is your turnaround time? What does it look like? I know you all the time are getting questions like, hey, can you close this in 48 hours? Or, can you close it within the week? Yeah, it's possible, but we don't know what's on there yet. Like we have to start the process and figure out what's on. It could be, a week, it could be, 10 days, whatever it may be, or, it could be a month if there's a ton of stuff I know we need this document, need all this stuff. But having that conversation of like, what is your typical turnaround time? And then also what is involved in that turnaround time? What all do you guys need and things like that, I think is another important question that investors should be asking their title companies.
Absolutely. And that's why once we develop a relationship with an investor after several transactions, things get quicker with the closings because they know, hey, the last 2 times they asked for this. Why don't I just go ahead when I'm getting the purchase agreement signed and go ahead and get this authorization signed by the seller at the same time? Or, various things. It helps build a sense of understanding to the investor. And so when they're out in the field, they know like, hey, this might be a hang up for us later. So I'm going to go ahead and find out what I can about the mortgage payoff, or I'm going to go ahead and find out what I can about the authorization or any liens or judgments that the seller might think they have on title. In reality, all we have to open title work is a purchase agreement. That's really it. That if it's written well, we should be good to go until we again get that search back and find out that, hey, I think we're going to need to get an authorization. But it is best to go ahead and find out from the title company, hey, we need this, this, and this. And typically we're going to reach out to your folks after we get the search back and request it. However, if you're already going to be with your people signing the documents and you carry this in your folder, why don't you just go ahead and get this, this, and this signed, and it'll save us the trouble later. And I also think it's important that you're not just looking for a title company that can turn it around in 48 hours. You're looking for a title company that can do it efficiently, which is important, but do it right and provide a sense of security in that they're providing title insurance that's not going to come rear its ugly head later and, take all of your savings to, make a correction somewhere in title.
Yeah, it's one of those things you always got to worry about. How quickly can you turn this around? You've never seen it before, and yeah, that's always you can be a little weary of that sometimes and stuff.
Well,
but
I'll ask questions because I get that all the time, right? So, hey, I'm going to get this signed tomorrow, Eric. It's going to be, let's say it's on a Monday. I'm going to get this signed on Tuesday. Can you close it on Friday? I'm not going to say no, but I'm going to tell you the hurdles I have to go through to try to make that happen. And I'm going to tell you that the proper way to get it closed, and I'll ask these questions. The proper way to get it closed is to go through everything according to plan, right? Like following the process. What do you know about mortgages on the property? What do you know about liens against the seller on the property or judgments against the seller? Where do you think the taxes stand right now? And when I ask these questions, I almost always get like the deer in the headlights look,
All
like,
right.
well, I have no idea. That's what you're for. Well, you're right. That is what we're for. And we have an immense amount of work to do between you giving me the purchase agreement and us going to the closing table. And if we rush it, there's a good chance we might make a mistake. We don't take that chance. So that's why our number one goal is not to rush it, but it is important that you understand we don't get paid till you get paid. Nobody gets paid till closing day, but we just have to make sure we're being cautious.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. So one of the other questions we kind of came up with is, just checking on things like, so a lot of, kind of wherever you are within the real estate space, even if you're not wholesaling yourself, there's a chance that you might be getting properties from wholesalers. So understanding whether your title company, we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but making sure that they kind of know how to do, double closings or assignments. They're familiar with that. I think is always an important question to ask, just because you never know what you could be off like, oh, I'm only going to buy my properties off the market, off the MLS. That's fine. That's great and stuff like that. But then what happens when that deal comes along that you like, and you're like, oh man, this is from a wholesaler. They have an assignment on this. This is going to work. Knowing whether your title company can kind of assure you like, hey, yes, yeah, we can do this. We can take care of this. So I do think it's an important question to ask too, to make sure that they are familiar with double closings, with assignments. You brought up things subject to earlier and stuff like that, but making sure that if there's a route that you're going to possibly get a property in down the road or whatever, which should be open if you're a real estate investor, like take on whatever investment you can get, take any
Right.
properties that you can get. So asking that question, I think, is an important thing to kind of put out there. Like, hey, do you understand double closings, assignments? Have you done them before? How qualified are you with this? Have you worked at these before? I think is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite honestly, again, that's kind of one of those that I answer without the question being asked, because I want them to understand that, we have that experience, but I also don't want, I mean, there's a lot of title companies that have the experience and know how to do that. But there's also a lot that will, again, look at you and say, this isn't right. We don't think this can happen. And it's just a matter of them not having done those kind of transactions. It's not illegal. Again, if there was anything like that, the title company is going to tell you that, this can't happen. But it's just important that you get working with somebody and you're aligned with a company that understands all the different nuances that can present themselves in these transactions. So absolutely a great question to ask.
Yeah, definitely. So I think kind of along the same lines, and we kind of already touched on this a little bit too, but kind of along those same lines of understanding what all you need for the purchase agreement, what all do you need for turning over and things like that. Like, what all do I need to be able to open title? So what do you really, it's like, hey, what do you guys need from me to open title? You need the purchase agreement. We talked about kind of going through all that stuff, but just any extra thing. I think is always important. And then I'm sure the follow-up question is going to be like, well, what kind of transactions are you probably going to close? So it's kind of a little back and forth and stuff, but just kind of putting that question out there, like, what all do you need to open title basically? And you just kind of touched on that before, knowing
Yeah.
that purchase agreement. What are the other things that like really that investors should be asking title companies, just to see? Everybody's a little different. I know everybody does, we worked with title companies before where we have to turn in our documents every single time we close a property with them.
Oh,
Like, can we have these on file? Like, you guys know us now, like,
right.
little things too. And I know there's little things that, certain title companies we work with, like, hey, can we just keep a check with you guys? So we just have earnest money there at all times and stuff like that. So there's little things like that that I think you can ask your title company for and just get to know them. But then really, what all do they need to know, or what all do they need from you to open title?
Yeah. And so we talked on, a purchase agreement is really all we need. But as you said, I'm going to ask, what kind of investing are you doing? So if they're going to come back to me and say, well, I'm doing subject to, well, it's in your better interest, the investor's interest, to go ahead and collect several of those other documents at the subject to purchase agreement signing. You want to go ahead and get your POA. You want to go ahead and get, notice to the financial institution. You want to get some of that stuff signed, because yeah, we're going to find that seller coming to the closing table and signing the documents, and that's an okay time for that stuff to get signed as well. But if we miss getting some of those documents signed by your seller, there's a good chance the seller could go AWOL. They may not be available when you finish doing whatever you're going to do with that subject to property and turn around and try to sell it. And you need to now get a payoff and do different things that the seller's the only one that has the authority to do that. If it's an assignment, for example, somebody says, well, I plan on wholesaling this. Well, where's your assignment agreement? Do you have an end buyer lined up already? Is this something that you've given yourself time in the purchase agreement to, get together? And it's always important to provide your title company with contact information for the other side. So make sure that if you're buying a property, you provide the seller's contact information. And likewise, if you're selling a property, make sure you're providing the buyer information. When you're buying a property, title company needs very little from you because, in the state of Indiana, there really is no proof that needs to be shown outside of a valid ID at closing to allow something to buy, even if it's in an entity. If you're selling a property and it's in an entity, now we have a different discussion because we're probably going to need corporate docs to give who has authority to sign the documents for the company. Is it something where the person who has authority isn't able to come to closing? So now we need a resolution to assign that authority to somebody else in the company. And we do all of that stuff. We do resolutions almost every day here for, out-of-state investors and new investors that they just don't realize it. But absolutely, you want your title company to hang on to those documents because you don't want to submit, corporate resolution docs and corporate entity docs every time you do a closing. So, we hang on to all of that in a data file that's secure on our network. And every time that investor comes back to us as the seller, the only thing we still have to go out and verify is the Secretary of State. We have to make sure that that entity is still an active, in good standing entity. And so that happens with every single time we do a closing where there's an entity as a seller, we have to make sure that that entity is in good standing. Other than that, we're going to hang on to the other corporate docs that you have, the, articles of organization, things like that help us do each transaction.
Yeah. So, all right. Great stuff, Eric. Really appreciate this. I think one of the last little things that really that investors should be asking the title company, kind of help develop that relationship, help just get set up for what you guys need to be able to do your job, make it a good transaction, is kind of just like, hey, how does the money work? Like, what do you guys, what's your time frame? How quickly do you guys hold earnest money? Do you have, how much earnest money does it have to be? Like, I know there's some stipulations on like, hey, if it's this much money and earnest money, you have to provide this many days to be able to close it. But then also just wiring instructions. How does it work? How much do I need to, or how much does it need to be a certain amount that has to be a wire, or can we just drop off a check? Can I bring a duffel bag full of cash? Like those kind of things. So I think it's just really important to know whatever title company you're working with is like, hey, how do you guys handle the money? What are the stipulations behind that? And then of course, along with that is like, what are the fees? What does all that encompass and things like that? But just really aside from the fees and stuff, let's get into like, what are those questions that maybe a title or an investor should be asking a title company when it comes with how does the money side work?
Yeah, absolutely. So every state is way different in this as well. And this is really when people say I want open escrow, that's what they're referring to. There are some settlement agents out there or title companies that don't do closings. They only do the back end work of providing a title search, title commitment, and the insurance, but they don't do the escrow and the closing. And so it is good to look for a title company that is an all-around title company. They do everything, title and closing. So when you open escrow, that means that we are the middle person. We're going to accept the earnest money. The earnest money is going to sit in an account waiting on that closing to occur. At closing, it's going to be applied to the buyer as the earnest money deposit. The seller and anyone getting money out of that closing, it could be an assigner, it could be a realtor, it could be anything. They have options as to how to get their money. We are a table funded state. So not every state is table funded. For example, in California, if you're buying and selling real estate, you might close today, but it's going to be 30 days before you get your money because it, by law, has to sit in escrow for 30 days. Indiana's table funded. So if it closes today, theoretically, the seller should get their money today. The buyer should have to bring their money today. Everything happens on the same calendar day. We have a law in the state of Indiana called the Indiana Good Funds Law. It went into place about 11 years ago in 2009, and it lays the parameters around what is good funds, what is good money to bring to closing. Anything up to $500, and this is really important for folks when anytime you have earnest money over 500, anything up to 500 could be in the form of a personal check. Okay, so if I'm going to have earnest money from $1 to 500, I can provide a personal check. Anything between 500 and 10,000 has to be in the form of good funds, meaning it can be a certified check, a cashier's check, bank check, whatever you want to call it. It cannot be a personal check. We no longer can accept personal checks. With the caveat, if you're going to provide a personal check that's over $500, we have to wait for 14 days after that money has been deposited because otherwise it can be recalled by the institution. So let's say we deposit a check for 5,000, that's earnest money, we close in 5 days. Within that 14-day window that we've deposited the money, the institution can actually recall that money, which puts the title company out. So these are protective measures that the state has put in place for title companies. Anything up to 10,000 can be in the form of a certified check. Anything over 10,000, and this means, earnest money, money brought to closing by the seller or by the buyer, money brought to closing from the lender, all of those. Anything coming into closing that's over $10,000 has to be in the form of a wire.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, going out of closing, we can issue checks for any amount of money. So we can issue $1 million check, we can issue a $5 check. It doesn't prevent us from how at the title company, because our money is considered certified, being that it's on an escrow check, an escrow account, we can issue that in any amount. But it's just really important when you're working with someone, especially if you're the buyer and you have to put $500 or more as earnest money down, make sure you go to a bank and get a certified check for that.
Yeah.
We also will hold, I heard you kind of brief on this a few minutes ago, we will hold escrow money for investors. I say we, I think about any title company should offer this. They'll hold the escrow money if you do an escrow agreement. So some investors will give us a little bit of money up front, let's say at the beginning of the year, and with each transaction they do, rather than them have to bring us money on each purchase, we just deduct it out of their escrow account. So there's a managed tracking to that.
Yeah. So, which I know is very handy for us and stuff like that. So, but what you're really saying is there's no duffel bags or briefcases full of money or anything going on. So
no, and I'm not going to lie, cash is king.
Yeah,
I mean, when I say what's good funds, cash is king. It always will be. We had a closing last week and somebody brought, it wasn't very much, but somebody brought cash. It was over the $500 limit for what could be and couldn't be a personal check. We have to be able to accept that. Now, large sum of money, most title companies, we don't have service through these vault companies. We don't have a bank vault. So we don't like doing business in cash because of the risk of us having to translate or transfer that to a bank somewhere.
Right.
But yes, cash is king. So should somebody feel the urge to go withdraw $100,000 in cash rather than just get a check, I suppose we would have to figure out a way to make it happen.
There we go. So Eric, thanks a lot for joining me. Really appreciate it. Great insights. Before we wrap up here, is there anything else that maybe we didn't talk about or that we missed that was just like, hey, is there one other question that really you should be asking your title company before you begin working with them, or just make sure you set up yourself for a good relationship with your title company?
Yeah, I would say, what kind of support do they provide to you as a business owner outside of your title? Okay, so something that's, always been important to us. And again, everybody has their niche, everybody has their differentiator, but it's helping, it's kind of holding the hand of those newer investors and newer agents to try and say, okay, like we may not be experts in this, but our background and consulting with business owners, we can actually work with you, whether it's helping you design flyers, maybe it's helping you. I mean, I've helped investors hire people for their team. I've helped people design leave behind folders for their appointments that they run. So just you want to make sure you're finding somebody that's going to be on your team, be there for you. I mean, it's a partner. That's what it is. So make sure that they're not just looking and buying for your title business, but trying to provide more value to you as a business owner.
Awesome stuff. And Eric, if somebody wants to reach out to you, maybe they have more questions just off of this episode or just questions for you in general, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, so my email is eric.downing, DOWNING @hockerlaw.com. That's HOCKERLAW. Phone number here is 317-578-1630. I'm at extension 37. Our website is hockertitle.com.
Great stuff. And if you need anything from me, my name is Brian Snyder. You can hit me up on social media or just at brian@simplewholesaling.com, and I'd be more than happy to help you out with whatever you need. So with that, that's another episode of the Indy Investor Pod, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care.